going to continue on our journey through Scripture, story by story, piece by piece, by turning to the 22nd chapter of the book of Genesis. Listen again for the word of the Lord. We'll be reading verses 1 through 8 from the story. After these things, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham?" And Abraham said, "Here I am." He said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I shall show you." So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. He cut the wood for the burnt offering, and set out, and went to the place in the distance that God had shown him. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place far away. Then Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. So the 2 of them walked on together. Isaac said to his father Abraham, "Father?" And he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "The fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." So the 2 of them walked on together. Friends, this is the reading and hearing of God's holy and eternal word. May God bless it to our hearing and understanding this day. In Jesus' name, amen. Please join me in a moment of prayer. Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be found acceptable and pleasing in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. His wildest dreams were all coming true, and he scarcely could believe his ears. He'd known nothing but abject poverty and the desperate struggle to make ends meet. He'd even taken a job selling newspapers after school to help his family out, but that hadn't been enough. But then one day, he found a golden ticket wrapped around a chocolate bar he had purchased with the $1 he found in the curb. The ticket was an invitation to tour Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, and it promised a prize beyond imagination. For the boy, whose name was Charlie, that promised prize was now a reality. And Willy himself had just told him what the prize would be: the chocolate factory. Willy was going to take Charlie in and teach him all his candy-making secrets, so one day he could actually give him the factory. And the best part was that he was going to get to bring his family with them. No more poverty, no more struggling, no more making ends meet. His wildest dreams were coming true, and he scarcely could believe his ears. And that's when Willy told him to remember what happened to the man who suddenly got everything he ever wanted. He lived happily ever after. The scene I just described from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory may be one of my favorite ending scenes of any movie I've ever watched. It's hard not to love Charlie and to celebrate for him the life inside the life that the chocolate factory promises him and his family. But beyond that, the ending of the movie poses some interesting questions about the nature of happiness and the fulfillment of our human desires and how those 2 things are connected together. As far as the movie's concerned, there's a direct connection. As far as Willy Wonka's concerned, there is a direct connection. And for the sake of the movie, I suppose that there is. But when we begin to think about real life, and particularly when the intent of that life is faithfulness, I'm not convinced that mere fulfillment of our desires will ever be enough. Something more is required. And as evidence to that, I point to our story from the 22nd chapter of the book of Genesis. I hope it's a familiar story to you. Abraham is commanded to take his son, his one and only son whom he loves, and travel to a distant place that's yet to be identified. And there he is to offer his son as a sacrifice to the Lord. The remainder of the story plays out without fanfare. We're simply told that Abraham rose the next morning after what we can assume was a sleepless night, gathered up the tools necessary for this sacrifice, and set out on the journey, knowing what the point of that journey was, but his son not. It's a troubling story, to say the least, although I suppose that we'd probably choose a more powerful and pointed adjective than troubling. A father asked to sacrifice his son is horrific in and of itself. But when we take the particularity of this father and this son, the stakes only increase. Remember the backstory to our story. About 20 years prior, before Abraham was Abraham, when he was still Abram, God had called to him and told him to pack his bags and move along with his wife to a land that he was one day going to give to their descendants. Now, of course, there was a gaping hole in the promise. Abraham and Sarah had no children, and they were already beyond childbearing age. What made it more poignant was the fact that having a child was the one thing that they wanted most in life. But it seemed to be the one thing they could not have. Wealth they had in abundance. A home they had. Security they had. Kinfolk and love they had. Faith they even had that. For surely that's why they were chosen. But a child they did not have. Perhaps you're getting a sense of the gravity of the promise that God was making to them and why they were so quick to forsake all those other things that I just listed. The wealth, the security, the home, the kinfolk, and love, in order to set out on this journey of faith, in order to trust that God would and could keep the promise and give them a child. It took about 20 years, but God kept his promise. Sarah conceived and gave birth to Isaac. They also, not suddenly, had everything they ever wanted. So what was going to happen? Would they be happy? Would they be content? Would their identity shift from being a couple centered on the promise of God to being a couple centered on the child that they always wanted to have? I think these are the questions that our story circulates around, and these are the questions that the story answers in dramatic fashion. Not just in what Abraham does at the end of the story, but particularly in the dialogue that he exchanges with Isaac as they journey along. Because Isaac's a perceptive young man. As they travel, he recognizes that they've got the wood, and they've got the flame in the form of a torch, and they've got the knife. They have everything they need to offer their sacrifice, except the sacrifice itself. Where is the lamb? Isaac asks his father, and Abraham responds, the Lord will provide the lamb. Now, I suppose that we could debate what was behind Abraham's words there. Maybe it was wishful thinking as he sought to build up in himself a hedge against the pain that came from knowing what was waiting for him at the end of this journey. Maybe it was compassionate misthinking as he sought desperately to preserve Isaac from that same pain of knowing what was waiting at the end of the journey. And again, maybe it was faith. Maybe he was believing that this God who had given him a son in his late age would act in the end so as not to take him away. The truth is, we don't know what Abraham was thinking in that moment. We only know what he said, and we only know what he did. He chose to believe that in the end, this God who had given him the child would act true to his nature, that this God would be good, that this God would be faithful, that this God would provide. It's worth noting at the end of the story that that's exactly what happened. God was good. God was faithful. God provided for at the very moment of obedience. As Abraham stood above his son, knife poised to strike, a voice cried from heaven, "Stop!" And looking up, Abraham saw a ram with its horns caught in the thicket. "The Lord will provide the lamb," Abraham told his son, placing God at the center. "The Lord will provide the lamb," Abraham told himself, placing God at the center. And with God at the center of that circumstance, obedience became possible for Abraham. And the thing is that it was only in the midst of obedience that the claim of the center was confirmed. The Lord provided. And looking up, Abraham saw a ram with its horns caught in the thicket. It's more than just a story with a happy ending. It's an invitation for us here today to consider our center, the places from which we gain our sense of security, our sense of comfort, our sense of hope. Because let's be honest, the last few months have been anything if not turbulent. We've seen two massive storms wreak havoc on the lives of millions. We've seen a rising tide of geopolitical tension and the threat of military action. Racial disunity has been injected again into our national dialogue, making it clear just how far we are away from truly loving our neighbors as we love ourselves. One thing after another has come along to shake our security. One thing after another has come along to challenge our peace of mind, our peace of heart, our peace of spirit. And in the midst of it, maybe, just maybe, we've gotten a glimpse at what Abraham was feeling as he journeyed to that distant place with his son, knowing what waited for him at the end of the journey. But in the midst of the journey, when confronted with the question, "Where is the lamb?" Abraham looked at his son and said, "The Lord will provide." It was more than an answer. It was a choice. It was a choice to plant himself in something more than just the fulfillment of his human desire. It was a choice to plant himself in the possibility that the God who provided the child would continue to provide, would continue to watch out, would continue to take care of both him and the child. The Lord would provide the lamb. It was more than an answer to the question. It was a choice as to what would be his center. It's the same choice that Jesus put before his disciples in our gospel lesson this morning as he sat on top of the hill in the midst of the Sermon on the Mount. "Do not worry about your life," he told them, "what you will eat and what you will drink." It was a choice because he wasn't just telling them not to be worried. He was telling them to seek the kingdom of God. He was telling them to plant themselves into something more than just the fulfillment of their physical needs. The food that they eat, the liquid that they drink, the clothes that they wear. Don't worry about those things, he says. Not because they're not worth worrying about, but because your Father in heaven knows that you need them. It was a choice to plant themselves in the promise of God's love, to plant themselves in the promise of God's care, to plant themselves in the promise of God's provision. What happened to the man who suddenly got everything he always wanted? Unfortunately, because it's just a movie, with Charlie, we do not know. We can write the rest of the story in our minds, but it'll only be a guess. But when it comes to Abraham, we do know. When he got the son that he always wanted, what did he do? What happened? Abraham planted his center in God. It didn't just change his life, and the life of his son, and the life of his wife, the life of his family. It's still changing lives today. It is still changing our lives. Abraham centered his life on God, and it changed the world. In the midst of the turbulent storms that surround us, in the midst of the threats and the dangers that make us feel at risk, in the midst of the fear that life is spinning out of control, we find our center in God, and may we know peace. Let us pray. Gracious and merciful God, we rejoice because you are the one who was in the beginning, the one who is now, the one who will forever be. You are the firm foundation upon which we can stand and face whatever circumstances surround us in life. So, Lord, help us to plant ourselves in you. Help us to find our hope in you. Help us to be happy in you, so that certain and hopeful and happy we will have something to do. We make this prayer in Jesus' name.